is just so powerful, and it really brings out the old lefty in me. I was sort of a socialist. I mean, I was never a real socialist. I was doing it for sort of lifestyle social clout, and I was kind of angry because I was a waitress and I felt hard done by. I mean, I'm not saying I was like some sort of deep thinker, but I always recognized the difference in how people perceive reality and how people perceive politics depending on what class they're born
Mm-hmm.
into.
Mm-hmm.
And the most aggravating and dispiriting thing about the United States Democrats, the party, has been they've replaced all of that kind of blue collar sensibility with this outrageous identity politics that's very toxic and very demoralizing to the very people it purports to save. And so Steve Bannon comes in like a bull in a china shop, and he does a far
Yeah.
better job than Trump, I think, in articulating just exactly
Yes.
what the MAGA movement is, and that is to represent the people who have been utterly left behind and shat on by establishment progressives and their lackeys in the professional managerial class. And nobody else does it like him. Nobody else does it
Mm-hmm.
like Bannon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he went to prison. I'm sorry. That's why they put him in prison, because they thought, holy crap, we have to shut this guy up for 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so relieved to see him back back in the
Yeah.
public
Yeah.
square.
I would say 2020 was around the time I discovered him, and it was after that election that I discovered him and kind of, but it was my husband had a lot to do with it too, because my husband would try every now and again and say, "Hey, Christine, why don't you look at this? Why don't you read that? Why don't you watch this video?" And little by little, I became more open to it. And I was a professor at the time, so I remember saying, "Well, if I'm going to teach my students to be open-minded and grow, I need to do a little bit of that myself." Then I became very shocked, and it was almost too much at
Yeah.
one time. And I needed to kind of pull back and take things in doses a bit. But I loved that I felt very comfortable listening to Bannon, because he did put things in a context in a way that I could understand, because
Yeah.
I didn't have a very strong involved background in politics or knowing. I just kind of voted the party I thought I was supposed to vote, and that was it. And I didn't pay attention to anything else. And that's that's the reality. So I think I became a little bit more engaged and participating through listening to people like him. And then my whole viewpoint has changed now. It's complete. I feel like a different person than I was 4 or 5 years ago. Um, Total 180. And I credit, that for some of it. And then also just being open to other media forms and other places to get news and other kinds of podcasts, and starting to kind of
Yeah.
put things together, right? A little bit. And there's a puzzle then that came together, and it was like, wow, this is huge.
Yeah, I guess I never followed Steve Bannon. I still haven't. I'm not familiar with him very much, except for just headlines, his name is familiar to me. But um yeah, I think politics are on all of our minds right now with the season and with what's coming up tomorrow. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are. Good afternoon. It is Monday, November 4th, and we have a full panel here today to chat. And so I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce, joined by Deborah Knox, Jennifer Friend, Christine Siefenwalk, and Jenny Holland. And delighted to see all of you today, and delighted to see you guys in the chat. Hi, Ninja Kitty. Good morning, Clem62, 97 cents. And Danny B says, fingers crossed for tomorrow, staying focused on my kids, my commitments, and health. Hello, student of rhythm, and Helena and John Noonan. It's nice to see you guys in the chat. Deborah, do you want to start us off with the intro to Solid Ground, and then we'll have a chat.
Sorry, I'm losing my ear thing. And excuse my cold voice. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or authoritarian measures such as COVID mandates in their workplace, university, children's school, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join one of our groups for only $5 a month. To find out how to join our community, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. Please note, Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And so Yeah, I mean, I think Jenny, you had some interesting thoughts there about how people are feeling. Many people are feeling just completely sold out by the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I was a Democrat voter all of my life, and in the past few years, that's changed. I am I there was that walkaway movement a few years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
I think
Brandon
that really
Straka.
resonated with a lot of people.
Mhm. He was
Yeah.
But
great. I had a chance to hear him speak at an event. He was really great. I mean,
mhm.
he was very inspiring, and he was part of my kind of discovery that started in 2020. He was a piece of that as well. And I was very relieved to find him.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand how especially this administration, I'm sure you can make a case that has been going on for decades, but this administration in particular has been so shockingly terrible. And so, like, it's almost as if the mask fell off. That I think in the back in the day, if you want to be sort of cynical or present an alternative view, that the Democrats, there's always been this uniparty, and there's always been corporate interests, and that's all true, and I get it. But what I would say to that is, but 20 years ago, and certainly 30 years ago, they made a very good showing of hiding it. Like, they were able to hide the malfeasance a lot better, and I think there was more rough and tumble, or there was more kind of openness in the dissent. And what Trump seems to have done, unwittingly or not, I have no idea, is just rip off this mask, and we find behind it, like the Wizard of Oz, trying to clang all the bells and pull all the levers, and being this pathetic specimen who's created a magic show and has been exposed. Because when and I have consumed mostly alternative media in the last 4 years, but not solely. And I do still read the mainstream media and listen to them as much as I can stomach it. And they really don't, they really refuse to see that reality. But it's so obvious. I mean, just think back to the COVID mandates, and Rochelle Walensky and her weird press conference saying that where she started to cry because people
Mm.
weren't getting vaccinated. I mean, that's not professional behavior. I mean, if you saw that at your like local village town hall, you'd be like, "Oh, you're embarrassing. We need to get better municipal officials up in here." Never mind like this incredibly powerful federal role, which really you
Mhm.
should be hiring at the top of the game, right? And I mean, it's one example after another. This terrible scene setting when Biden delivered that speech, when it was all black and red
Oh,
behind
he
him.
was like,
Oh,
It
yeah.
looks like it was in Mordor. I mean, I'm like, who is setting this? Who is telling you to do this? And then the Kamala Harris, which, to be honest, I think she's done a better job as a candidate than she did presenting herself as VP. Maybe they got her off the Quaaludes or something. But like, remember when she did the Ukraine is a country in Europe and Russia is a country in Europe? I mean, like,
well,
how did these people rise to the top? Obviously, our system of elite selection is completely broken, and, that's what Trump did. Trump made them all look like the fools that they are.
Well,
Now, a lot
they all seem illegitimate, like they've been placed in a spot that they don't
Mm-hmm.
belong. Like Kamala, why why has it been allowed to happen that we just replaced a candidate? We just candidate swapped. We had an
Yes.
incumbent, and when we decided he wasn't going to be the guy, we just moved his VP in like they're interchangeable. What the
they
heck
did.
happened?
It's not even
I,
constitutional to do
No.
that. Go
They
ahead,
did,
Jacqueline.
I'm not supporting it. They did make it look like she talked to all the electors for Biden and that they all agreed to support hers. Now, I don't think that's necessarily democratic, but like I feel like they tried to do an interim step that looked like something. We might not think
I
it's a legitimate.
It's just a pathetic. It's just a pathetic. I mean, it just the showing. Anyway, yeah, it was very surprising to me. I didn't think that that was going to be the case either. I thought they'd at least have a couple of potential, you know, primaries. I don't know,
I'm glad you
candidates.
mentioned Walensky too, because I that that was another point where she seemed very nervous and uninformed. None of this seemed like it was coming from her. She wasn't an empowered person. She was
Well,
a spokesperson.
she said she was learning things from CNN. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Oh my
Yes.
gosh, I don't
Yeah.
remember that. Oh, that's
Yeah,
horrible.
that's absolutely right. She did say that. She did say that. And then the disinformation board with Nina Jankowicz. I mean, I just like where the the inability of these people to pull off the scam, has been the most defining, like has been what's changed the game for a lot of people. I mean, look at us. There's how many? There's five of us here. All of us middle-aged, middle-class Democrat voters, lifelong Democrat voters. And we're not special. We just are the people. I don't know what it is about people who are able to break away from the programming and say, no, I can't take it anymore. But you know, like I never was this skeptical of either of the Clintons, for example. I didn't like John Kerry, and I thought he was deeply. Oh no, wait, Kerry was Kerry, yeah, John Kerry. And I thought he was deeply kind of uninspiring. But I didn't think he was the biggest clown in the world. And then
Right.
you have Biden like eating ice cream and falling off bicycles. Like this is
Right.
like Banana Republic stuff without
Mhm.
the torture chambers that we know of. It's like mad. It's absolutely mad. And it's almost like it's been maddening on purpose because like the bigger the lie, was it Goebbels who said this? The bigger the lie, the easier it is to believe. Like the crazier it got, the more certain segments of people really kind of clung on to the lie. I mean, I knew someone who posted last week, and this is a person who's extremely knowledgeable, worked in media, sophisticated adult, who was absolutely espousing this idea that the Madison Square Garden rally was the same as the Nuremberg rally. I'm just like,
Hmm.
I'm like worried. This is what worries me about tomorrow, and I've written a piece
Yeah.
about this. I'm gonna post it tomorrow. I am worried. I'm worried, obviously, that if Harris gets elected, right? That is my number one concern. But I'm actually worried what's going to happen if Trump gets elected, if he gets elected. I'm
Yeah.
genuinely afraid for the nation because I don't think the really deep blue Democrats will not be able to deal with the psychic break that causes.
That's right.
That's what Mark Halperin was saying. He said he thinks there'll be a big mental
That's
health
right.
crisis. And I was just talking to a friend, and he said,
It's good
like,
for business.
a friend yesterday said he's going to need to recover. He's going to need time to heal afterwards. Like already anticipating
That,
this.
I was working at a nonprofit as a therapist back when Trump was elected in 2016, and they offered counseling for all of us. They provided a counselor that they brought in and said, if you're having trouble and this is really distressful, to you, here's a counselor to help you deal with the results of the election. I mean, that alone was quite horrifying. And I just remember saying, I'm fine with that. And I know a lot of people that voted for him at the time anyway. And this is crazy. Why are we crying and falling apart? Our mental psyche has been completely shattered because this particular
The school in
person
the city
won.
is doing that too. Like there's a private
It was
school in the
nuts.
city. Private school in the city already told kids if they're just really upset tomorrow or whatever, Wednesday, they don't have to come to school, and they can have a counselor lined up for them. So
Well,
like,
yeah, the entire strategy on the Democrat side seems to be we have nothing compelling and positive to offer you, so we're going to just make you really scared of the other guy. And we're going to
That's
get you
right.
so afraid that you're going to be compelled to get out and vote. We're getting out the vote based on fear. And so it's so irresponsible. It's so horrifying to me. Like there was this ad. Did you guys see this ad where this woman is writhing in agony, crying on the floor, and her boyfriend or husband is on the phone to emergency services, and the emergency service guy on the other end says, yeah, she needs an abortion right away. That's what she needs, an abortion right away. And then the Republican congressman enters the room and says, sorry, you can still have children, but not with her because she's going to die because we took away her abortion rights, or something like that. And this is an actual ad to vote Democrat. I don't know if it's the party that puts it out, if it's just some PAC that puts this out, whether it's endorsed, but it's in the same style as the one with the guy masturbating that we talked about.
Yes,
this
last
week.
week. Yeah.
it's that same thing. It's like, first of all, whatever's going on with that woman, I don't know what it is, but there's no way an emergency services guy is going to diagnose that someone needs an abortion. And it wouldn't be an abortion at that point. That wouldn't be, that's not the same thing as an elective abortion. So the irresponsibility of that, the blatant manipulation of people.
What's the older white guy, right? Is it the same one? It's like an older white guy.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's like the entire Democratic apparatus from, the DNC on down to people who run the Smithsonian, people who run the media, that they're literally captured. Like they have the mentality and the maturity level of an earnest 13-year-old girl who's kind of a nerd. Like that's, and wants to be like, oh my God, I'm going to fight the power. I mean, no, like that is, I say it all the time, but I'm like, it continues to shock me. It continues to appall me because the more serious the stakes become, the more pathetic the abortion argument becomes. Okay. If you are going to, even if you're a young woman, even if you believe in the right to choose and all that, that's all well and good. But you're gonna say, oh, okay, well, this is the list of things that Democrats have done in the last 4 years between the vaccine mandates and the war in Ukraine and the soaring inflation and the however many millions of unvetted, unknown people have crossed into the border and have murdered people and murdered women and murdered children and done all this stuff. It's all well documented. You're gonna be like, yeah, but what if I need an abortion? Like, you need to grow up. The American Democratic female population needs to grow up because abortion is now a luxury issue. It is not a wartime issue. It is not. I'm sorry, girls, but you're just gonna have to manage for a couple of years while we can get the society back to some place of sanity.
Well said. There was this post that I reposted on Twitter from yesterday. This woman says, I know I'm 73 years old, but we didn't have sex before marriage, so therefore there was no need for all these abortion clinics. We controlled ourselves. Is there some reason the women of today can't do the same thing? Truly just asking. Opinions appreciated.
I saw that and I almost responded, but then I felt lazy because I think that's lovely. The problem is, realistically now, I think if there was a young woman who wanted very much, the whole thing, get married, maybe have some kids, and wished to wait until marriage, I think she'd actually have a very hard time ever getting married. I think it almost precludes her unless she's particularly religious and observant, and she can find other people within a religious community that are equally observant. Because for the most part, nobody is willing to wait, and it would really preclude her from ever developing a strong enough relationship to get to the point of marriage. For most people, I'm not saying there aren't some people, but what if you feel that way and you're actually not religious? You just feel that way because you feel that's the best thing for you psychologically, financially. You would have a really hard time, I think, getting married.
What about just waiting until you're in a relationship where there's a strong commitment? I mean, I don't see that being that hard. And
I think you can do that.
Person who is unwilling to compromise on that with you, then they're not worth your time anyway. I mean, really, what are you doing?
I agree with that. I think the relationship thing, yes, but if you were like hardcore, not till marriage, I do think you'd have a hard time, and I think it would reduce your chances of getting married. That's my opinion.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I don't think it's so. Abortion is, it's very tragic, in my opinion, that we even get to that place where that has to happen. I realize why it does and why we need it and all of that. I know plenty of people that have gone through this, but it is a very kind of painful and full of grief kind of issue that you even go as a woman, and this is something that you're doing, and there's some sort of exciting praise around it, like, yes, we're protecting our rights to have abortions, this is exciting. It's not exciting. It's a very sad and tumultuous experience, and I don't think that there's anything that's that exciting. But and that's part of what kind of grosses me out about that entire argument, because people are jumping for joy that they're able to do this rather than thinking what has happened in our world that's led up to the point that you have to even think about this or consider this to begin with. How did we get there? And how are we excited about it? Okay, it's a right, let's just say, and that's fine. You can do that if you need to. There are a lot of reasons why, but this isn't something to be hearing for, and that's what I feel like it's turned into.
That's
And
exactly
I
right.
can't stand that.
Yeah.
The only real issue that the Dems have. I mean,
Yes.
Yes.
not Trump and that's it, really.
Yes.
Yes. That's exactly it. And Christine, you're exactly right. They're jumping for joy. And I've never seen anything so distasteful in my life. Like really, really gross, actually. It's really gross on like a very basic level, that these supposedly kind of like smart political minds are like, oh, what are we gonna use today? And it's gonna be like, oh yeah, kill babies. Like, well, okay, that is the most degrading political spectacle I've ever seen. It's really going to go down in the history books as far as I'm concerned. That's all you have is let's end pregnancies. That's
Well, and
literally all.
at the point where you're having an abortion, there's a bunch of fail safes that have already been broken, right? Like we talked just now about waiting till you're in a relationship that's committed before you start having sex with somebody, which seems like a pretty low bar. I mean, this hookup culture is pretty ridiculous. I mean, who has a perfect past? I don't know. But is it too much to ask that we try raising our kids to not have casual sex, that consent is not the only factor that needs to be considered before having sex with somebody?
Mhm.
I think that that's a pretty low bar. So that's already been failed at the point of pregnancy. But also, we have so many birth control methods. If you don't like hormonal birth control, there are other methods. There are other ways that if you are really not wanting to have a child, you can not get pregnant, and it's almost perfect. It sometimes some percentage of people will still, but why clinics all over the place? Why this big rush for abortions? It should be very rare that a person, if they're doing things right, finds themselves in this position. And it should be those rare cases of like rape and incest that we're talking about, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about shout your abortion, or, I had an abortion, or I'm just going to go to the DNC to get my DNC. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's pretty crazy.
I think girls, I mean, I don't know any girls like this. I don't know any young women like this. I really don't. But I mean, certainly on social media, they get a lot of traction. There's this sense of, they have been completely stripped. They've grown up in a world with zero privacy or intimate spaces, and they don't have any sense because they're young and because young people don't know what's up. I mean, I didn't know what was up when I was young, so I'm definitely not saying like I was better than them. Um, they don't understand that this exuberance for bad choices, which I 100% had, when I was a young woman and a teenager or whatever, that this exuberance for bad choices, they will regret it. And I don't mean like they regret their abortion or whatever, but they will regret having like exposed so much of what is special about being a woman, whether it's sex and sexual activity or pregnancy or a beautiful young body, any of those things, that they've exposed it so much. And the only difference between them and me, I think, is when I was that age, society, there was very firm guardrails in place in society that would have frowned on it. So I didn't ever, if I had been encouraged to act that way, or if I had been driven internally by whatever turmoil I had to act that way, I would have had a swift negative reaction that would have stopped it. Whereas now, instead of a swift negative reaction, they get major clicks and major clout.
Mhm.
And it's an
Mhm.
attention-based economy. So
Mhm.
they are rewarded for this, this lack of wisdom in ways that I mean, I think, I don't know, do you guys agree with me? Do you find that just over time in your life you acquire perspective and you become a little bit wiser and you just look back and think, oh, the folly of youth? I mean, that used to be a known thing.
Mhm,
And now we're running
mhm.
around acting like the
Absolutely.
21-year-olds should be telling us what to do and how to act.
And
And
we
no,
have
no,
Greta Thunberg as somebody who actually meant
one of
something
many. Yeah,
politically. Yeah.
right.
And
Um,
the
yeah.
No, I was just going to say the other thing on this, with this framing with the Democrats too, is like they wanted this umbrella of freedom, right? Like they wanted to reclaim as though we're the party of freedom, but the only one that they're having is on this issue, which even that thinking about it, I'm free to have an abortion, is a little tricky. And they're not even speaking of all the other things they didn't let people be free about, like
Well,
speaking
that's
or
yeah,
bodily consent for, a vaccination or whatever.
yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It was so hypocritical. Freedom of choice, freedom to do, what I want with my body, but a forced mandated vaccination. And I remember going to a little protest that was happening outside a concert when all this was going on. And my husband and I and a couple of friends were there just kind of watching and looking at what was going on. And that was the big, and it was funny because the people that were pro-vaccine and pro-body choice were the ones that didn't have a comment back. They had nothing to say back other than you're killing people. That's what their answer was. And you're murdering people by not getting vaccinated, but you should have complete autonomy over your body when it comes to an abortion. Well, some people would argue that's killing too. And
Yeah.
I don't know my standpoint on that necessarily, or when it becomes killing versus in the beginning when it's not. My whole entire viewpoint on that has shifted in many different ways now. So I'm not quite sure what I think anymore about all that, where I was very clear at one point. But one thing that I was extremely clear about back then and now is that the hypocritical nature of those mandates and the forced vaccinations, and yet we're sitting here saying we should be able to have 100% autonomy over our bodies. That to me was really very distressing.
Yeah, that was 100% my final break with being wholeheartedly pro-choice. I'll never. I'm not. I don't call myself pro-life. Because I still think it should be allowed in the first trimester, but only in the first trimester, and maybe not even the full 12 weeks. Actually, I just think what it made for me. It made me realize, like, okay, so because my body, my choice was a great slogan. Great slogan. I'm like, yep, got it, 100%, feel it, understand it, intellectually it checks out. And then until it didn't, when it was like, oh, well, actually not on that issue. I'm like, well, you can't have it on one issue and not on the other. And then I was like, actually, really, because it made me think about at what point does the body of the child, the fetus, the developing fetus become its own body. And I was like, oh, actually, we're on very thin ice here. And I will never call myself pro-choice like that again. Never, ever, ever. I cannot put into words how much I despise the Democratic Party apparatus for doing that.
Well, an abortion at under 12 weeks looks 12 weeks or less, under 12 weeks, we'll say, looks very different than an abortion at 5 months. And I
Yes.
think I mentioned this last week, as I had a client who was 13 years old. This was back when I was an intern, actually, as I'm a therapist. And she had an abortion at 5 months. And that was not the same thing. The process of that, I'll spare the
Yes.
details, was not the same as the process of getting one in the first trimester, 12 weeks or
100%.
less.
And we pretend like that's not the reality. That is 100% the reality. And if I'm being asked as a voter, an American voter, and I did vote my overseas ballot, I am being asked to make a choice between accepting unlimited abortion with no restrictions, with no age restriction, or no abortion. And I'm going to go no abortion because I'm sorry. Like if you're forcing me to do that, you're inhumane and monstrous. Okay. And you are going to harm women who in early trimester, in early stage pregnancies, in a reasonable, rational society, you can really kind of say, okay, there's a privacy argument there. There's no privacy argument there when there's two arms, two legs, and, like an actually moving around, fully developed human
Yes.
baby. Like that is not acceptable. And, damn those Democrats, damn them for making the choice so stark because it's grotesque. I mean, it's just
Well, that's
grotesque.
just it. That's just it. It's needlessly being forced into this black and white thing
Yes.
by that in
Yes.
order to manipulate people politically. We don't
Yes.
have to talk. It doesn't have to be. There is gray area, and most people agree that there's gray area. Most people would agree.
Yes.
How
that
did we get to that point where there was no gray area anymore? Because it did used to be, I feel like, a more nuanced views regarding abortion and the
Yes.
ethics surrounding it. And now it's very much like you're either all for it in absolutely any circumstance, or you have to be against it. And I don't think that a complex issue like that can be so black and white. I don't know how we got there.
I think it's
was-
all political manipulation. I think that that's the only reason that it is that way. It's because the Democrats know that many women are single issue voters on this one. And so they're forcing this, this false dichotomy. And because they know that if they pull on this string, many women will just fall over into their camp because
I
they
want to go
don't
back.
want to see
I want to go back a bit
Deborah.
earlier though, too,
Mm.
because I think currently the Democrats are being worse on this, but I don't know when it started that whether it's evangelicals, like who got way extreme, like we can't have any abort. Like I think these dynamics started and one would do a little bit one side, one would do the other side, and then they just kind of like went out to their end poles, like on both sides. So I can't, having it at all as an option, like I don't know if people were more reasonable then probably. So I don't know which side started ratcheting in a direction, but it seems like each one's a response, and it's even accentuated now because the Democrats don't have any other issue to run on.
That's right. They
That's
don't.
true. That's true. I mean, I remember they still do them occasionally, the pictures outside the clinics, and
Yes.
and obviously there was a couple of horrible murders of obstetricians and all this. Really, the extremists were all on the pro-life side. At least that's what it seemed to be. But then,
Yeah.
but that's because
Bombing places or whatever. Yeah.
the weight of the culture was against this sort of prideful abortion, because we still have the sense of privacy, and we still had a sense of like, oh, it's not good, and you should definitely not be the kind of person who needs one or needs multiple ones, God forbid, in your life, and like that kind of thing. Whereas that's gone because this new generation of young women has been raised very differently to the way Gen X was raised, and certainly the way boomers were raised, and they also have never had a fight. They've never had a cause to crusade for, which makes them kind of zealots.
Yeah.
And they're, like I say, yet again, they're young. So they don't, you can be very callous when you're young and very cruel in a way, because you could very easily dismiss things that you learn over time to take more seriously, like other people's opinions, for one thing. So I think it was a combo of those two things. But I mean, I was writing a piece on this last week, and I need to find a place to publish it. But like, I looked on the Alan Guttmacher Institute's website, and they're a very pro-choice organization. In fact, so pro-choice that I remember in the late '90s when I was working at the New York Times as a clerk, I gave an editor or something like some of their information because it was coming into the newsroom via fax, and they dismissed it out of hand. Said they're an advocacy group. They're not a real think tank. They're pro-abortion. We don't use them because they're too biased in one direction or another. Okay. That was the New York Times in the '90s. And anyway, on their website, there's a state-by-state map. And I didn't look at all 50 states, but Maine, Minnesota, Michigan, Oregon, California, all have no term limits on abortion. Zero term limits on abortion.
Wow.
Yeah.
And New York State has zero. They have a term limit like around viability, whatever that means, but not if but you can use a emotional health of the mother or family circumstance of the mother. So basically, a woman can say whatever they want and get an abortion at 8 months pregnant or 9 months
Good
pregnant.
Lord. No.
So I mean, there's multiple states where this happens. It's completely.
And so with the states that don't have any term limits, you could go get an abortion at 8 months without it being for medical reasons.
Right. Exactly.
This client of mine was 13. It is staggering. I'm in California, and this was back
California, obviously, is one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Early in the early 2000s, maybe. That client of mine, it was in California that she was able to get an abortion at 5 months when the baby was it was a fetus that was fully formed and everything. And what they have to do at that point is extremely vicious. And
yeah. I mean, and just think about that, because like there's no medical reason if there's there's no reason if a baby is viable and the baby has some catastrophic um, physical problem or is not going to survive birth, that baby can still be born and made comfortable and let to like that baby can be cared for as its own person. It doesn't need to be killed. Okay. And like at that point, that like once a baby can survive, with medical care, why would you then deliberately choose to kill it? Like there's no like it's not like, it's not like a septic miscarriage where the stuff has to be removed in order to save the life of the mother. Like
Right.
at a certain point where the two things are no longer in conflict, like the women who die because of bad medical practice around failed pregnancies die because of blood poisoning mostly, right? So they're not getting the kind of the care that needs to be done when you have this when you have a systemic infection,
You
as far as
know,
I understand.
Jenny, something you said a little bit ago is really, I think it's really important to highlight. And you were talking about, I think it was you, Jenny, you were mentioning the don't you, gosh, I'm stumbling over this. The pro-vax people, maybe it was Christine who said this. The
Yeah.
pro-vax people who were saying you need to take it because you could kill someone.
Yes,
Yes.
that was
But
me.
here we have what is going on with the mechanistic thinking that seems so prevalent on the left. This is
Yes.
this pro-abortion. We've got the euthanasia movement. It's
And we have
really, and the public health,
and the
public health.
transit of children.
Yeah, the transing of children too. But the public, this idea of public health says life is so important that we all must be forced to take these utilitarian measures that will result in harm to some of you, but more of us will get out alive, or more of us will be in a better position if we all are forced into these utilitarian things. But what's the purpose of that if we are also not really valuing life for the most vulnerable people around, the very elderly who we're okay with euthanizing because they're taking up our medical beds, they're costing your tax dollars, so we need to kill them off. And then the very, very young, like these babies who are potentially viable outside the body, but we don't mind killing them because the woman wants. What are we sacrificing to? This seems like a problem of moral bankruptcy, really.
It's
There's some
such a
kind of, oh, go ahead.
bankruptcy. Yeah. No,
I'm
go
just
on.
wondering if there's something about somehow, and it started maybe with the boomers, this sort of like perpetual youth thing and individual optimization of my own self. Then there's like anything else is kind of baggage, like, and just kind of slough off. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything to that. Like everybody wanting to be in the, the maiden mother, like being in the maiden phase forever or something like that. And just everything else is sort of like friction on my path.
Yeah,
And
no,
the
you said it
breakdown
exactly
of
right.
like the two-parent family structure, the breakdown of that unit. I mean, it's being completely obliterated. And I think that has something to do with it also. To have two parents that are, with children, and those two parents are together or married or whatever it is, but that core nuclear family bond seems to be completely disrupted. And I think that may have something to do with why we've gone down this path. I mean, it's a chicken and egg thing, I suppose, which came first. But
Yeah,
the outcome is that it's broken. I mean, our family structures are broken.
Yeah, the Collinses had a podcast today on like, it was something to the effect of, are the Democrats creating single women? Or like, it was, because the percentage of single women who are voting Democrat is like 70% or something. And it's sort of like you're talking about chicken egg, right? Is it like, are we getting more women to want to be the states there? So just be single, just have your abortion, just don't bother get married, just,
I don't need a man. I don't need a man. I mean, that's kind of the mantra. Yeah.
Yeah.
Men are disposable in a lot of ways in that line of thinking.
Yeah. But Leslie, you said this about this mechanization. And when I think of the late term abortion thing, which I genuinely find so horrifying, and the trans kids thing, I think I ask myself the same question. That is, who are these doctors who are willing to perform these acts? And there's apparently millions of them, or I don't know, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. how are we producing a medical establishment that is willing to abort an 8-month or 9-month baby, gestated baby, and to castrate boys and young men and remove the uteruses and the breasts of young women and girls? Who are these people? Who are these people? This is
Yeah.
like this is shit that Mengele couldn't have fucking invented if he like this is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all wandering
Mm-hmm.
around like, "Oh, Jesus, I hope Trump doesn't get elected because he's Hitler." You know, you're like,
Right,
"Okay."
right,
I mean,
right.
sure, that's the number one problem is this blowhard real estate developer who does not have a conservative bone in his body, by the way.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
and, we're just gonna skip along and not look into our own families and look into our own communities and our own schools and think, what is the moral lesson that we are teaching young people and that the rising professional managerial class that they're carrying into the world this worldview that allows them to take these actions. I mean, I can safely say, and thankfully I'm not a doctor, I would not do those things. If a
Mm-hmm.
patient came to me and
yeah,
said, "Do this," I wouldn't
that's
do it.
such a good point, Jenny. Like, who are these people who are doing this? There is an individual making an ethical decision behind every one of these incidents. The transing of children, these poor little girls, like you see these teenage girls with their breasts cut off and they're like showing off their scars, and it's so sad. And you think, who did this to you? Like, a surgeon did this. And I know I read this the other day when I was talking with Josh Slocum, which I'm going to put that conversation up probably this week. I had a great conversation with him, but it bears reading a few times. And we talked about this with Jennifer Law too. The original Hippocratic Oath contained these words: "Nor shall any man's entreaty prevail upon me to administer poison to anyone. Neither will I counsel any man to do so. Moreover, I will give no sort of medicine to any pregnant woman with a view to destroy the child." So
Mm-hmm.
these two phrases, I won't hurt you. I won't hurt
Even if I
my
have your
patients, even if they want to, and I won't perform abortions. I won't hurt or kill. I will not use my skills as a medical doctor to hurt anyone. And so when you see these trans surgeries, I think that it's an interesting conundrum, because where did we start to cross that line? And I think it's probably with plastic surgery for cosmetic reasons. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a really difficult one, because who's to say if someone is needing, if like an aesthetic, you can see, like, there's clear cases like with a cleft lip or something, a cleft palate. Well, this person will, we could say, need
Or burn
some kind
victim.
of surgery. Yeah, a burn victim. Yeah, somebody who has a disfigurement that actually causes them to either look grotesque in a way that's going to make everybody stop and stare at them, or cause them dysfunction in their mobility or their movement or whatever in their life. So that's a case. But then what about body dysmorphia, or the girl who just really hates her big chin? And yeah, she's not as pretty as she would be if she had a smaller chin. And the doctor can look at that and go, I can see that this person will have a better life if I help her out here. There's a line now that you're drawing. I am going to hurt your body with my scalpel and my drugs. I'm going to hurt you. It's going to take an ounce of flesh. We're going to hurt you, but you're going to do it for a payoff that's going to be better. And when it comes to like blepharoplasty, whatever, the eyelid thing, you see these before and afters of women who really look haggard and old, and just really can barely even see under their eyes. And then afterwards, bright, and you can see her personality. You can see she's happy and whatever. So it's so tricky. And you're
Mm-hmm.
making that kind of ethical decision with every one of those cosmetic procedures. And at this point where you're doing this for someone who says that they're trans, what is your calculation that you're making? What are you doing when you're doing that? I think it's such a nuanced and messy topic.
I don't know. I mean, is it? I mean, it is. I think you've given some really good examples of people whose quality of life would be, demonstrably better. Not just the real hard cases of like victims of burns or deformities that are really serious, but even just kind of more minor things like nose jobs, having your ears pinned back, and those are really interesting cases. But like, I personally feel like that wouldn't. Maybe I'm being like Pollyannish, but like that's obvious. Whereas coming into a doctor and being like, I want to have breasts the size of hot air balloons, and otherwise I'm going to be sad. That's obviously a no. I
Yeah.
mean, the thing is, doctors are paid for this, so they're never going to say no as long as the profit motive
Right.
is there. But like, just even taking that out, because you can get breast surgery, you can get breast augmentation on the NHS. I've been told,
Oh, wow.
I haven't fact checked this, but I've been told you can get it on the NHS if you say you're like sad and depressed.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my
I don't know-
gosh.
I don't know
Who
if that's
wouldn't
true.
then?
Wow.
It's gender affirming care, right?
Yeah, I mean, I had
Yeah.
Well, that's the
a
argument that
lady-
trans people use. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
But
no, I was told that
some of the motivation is that some of the doctors, at least out here in California, could have their licenses revoked or suspended if they refuse to perform trans
now,
surgeries.
yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
we're at now. And so
Wow.
some of these doctors are like, and that's what happened with COVID and the vaccines. The ones who were,
Yeah.
vaccine hesitant, you weren't able to say that to your patients necessarily. So they held their licenses over their heads, and that's happening in the therapy world too. They hold our licenses over their heads if we are not providing gender affirming care versus exploratory therapy. So there's an apparatus that's much larger than those individual people who are just trying to make a living and put food on the table or whatever it is. So that bigger
Totally.
apparatus, how do you break that apart?
Clem 62, I want to highlight a couple of comments. Clem 62 says cosmetic surgery doesn't cause lifelong patients or sterilization. And then Jay Bourne says fertilization should be considered a human right and protected by law until of legal age. I think that there's that we've talked about this before. Women often are told no about tubal ligation and permanent sterilization.
Even hysterectomy, right? Like having their
Oh.
people and they're like, oh, don't, you might want to have a child.
Well, that's another topic altogether. I think like removing an organ like the uterus is not just it shouldn't be something that is done casually.
Well, that's the thing that like with people who are women who might have a health issue, they get told all this don't. But then
Right.
you have a trans person who's like, I just need to get rid of it. And they're
Well,
just sort of be like, okay.
Yeah. If you believe in the fairy tale of the born in the wrong body, then maybe you do think that you're doing that thing, Jenny, that you were talking about, where you're actually leading to much better life outcomes based on this surgery. If you are a true believer in this poor person was born in the wrong body, I have to help them go forward in life in as close to the right body as possible, then maybe it becomes worth it to take those kinds of hits. But I do think the fertility, giving up your fertility at an age when you don't know what that means is it's shocking that doctors are willing to do this.
It's criminal. I mean, I think it's nothing short of criminal.
And we really have to ask, I mean, how many doctors are actually sadists?
Oh yeah, you know what? That's a
Yeah.
really, I want to talk about this. I want, maybe we can spend a whole hour on this at some point. Medical sadism is a real thing. I have seen it working in the medical field. I've been it's very common in medical administrative staff. There is a sadism.
Really?
Oh yes. Haven't you ever had somebody just be when I worked in the back office of this little medical clinic in Texas, I worked there for 4 or 5 years. And one of the things that really bothered me was the attitudes of the staff. They were like needlessly annoyed and irritable and irritated with patients who called. It was like they used the little exchanges with the patients to sort of grind their gears a little bit or put them on hold a little extra or just act annoyed with them. There was this very casual sadism that was part of the culture of interacting with patients. I wondered at the time, what is causing this? Because I have seen this, I've been on the receiving end of this in other clinics. It kind of, Clem 62, I've seen receptionists be rude. Yeah, I think it's the day in, day out demands of patients. I think patients are often at their worst when they're talking with their medical provider. You're sick, you're scared, you're whatever, there's stress involved in this for you. And when your job is to constantly interface with people's stress that way, I think that you can become jaded and sort of defensively interact with people in a cold and irritable way. And I think that it needs to be talked about and addressed and trained out of these people who work in these jobs. I think that there should be attention paid to this phenomenon because it's incredibly common. But Later Holmes says sadistic doc is almost an archetype.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Little
just wanna
Shop
say
of Horrors, Steve Martin. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I have a friend here in Belfast who has written a book called Dr. Bot: Why Human Doctors Fail Us and How AI Can Save Lives. So maybe she could come on and talk about
Oh yeah. I don't like
sadism.
AI, but I would love to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I try and go to the doctor as little as possible. That's my solution to this problem.
Yeah, one of my girlfriends is a naturopathic doctor, and she was pre-med. She was going to go into just regular medical school and decided not to. And one of the reasons that she decided not to was that she said basically in medical school, they train a lot of your empathy out of you.
Wow.
And she didn't like that. And in naturopathy, they train you to be a collaborator with your patients. So you're more interacting on a respectful peer level. You're the expert on this information that they've come to get from you, but you're not in authority over them.
Yeah. I mean, I having just implied that doctors are all sadists, I feel I should maybe present the other side to be fair, which is I cannot imagine the difficulty of the training process to become a doctor. Like, I don't think there's anything harder really in the world. Maybe just maybe fighting wars, but even that there's a certain camaraderie. I don't know. It seems like an absolute nightmare to me that you're willing to put yourself in this position of having to see people constantly at their worst and try and help them even when they don't want to help themselves, and you're exhausted and you're massively overtaxed yourself, and you need to be able to shut down some of your empathy in order to function. You know, you can't you have to be able to function in an emergency room. You have to steel yourself and you have to kind of harden your heart to a certain degree, and I get that. I do get that. But I wonder, you know, I wonder if that circle can ever be squared, because I love homeopathic stuff. Sure. I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm fine with it. I don't disbelieve it. I'm not skeptical of it in particular. But you know, sometimes the leg needs to be sawed off, and somebody has to have the balls to do it. You know, that's certainly never going to be me. But the work that nurses and doctors do, the good ones, is obviously just extraordinary. I don't know how to make that system more humane.
You know, it's
And
just
weed out the bad actors. Sorry, weed out the bad actors. Yeah.
I do think another thing about this race, just going back to the election, which is so interesting, is how, because with the Maha coming in with the MAGA, whatever, seeing this embrace of the health and the sort of ways that people want to approach this, which the Dems, you would have thought, would have been the ones behind the crunchy, we're going to do our homeopathy, but I'm one of those people. And that flipped, in terms of which side is. It's funny to see people who didn't care about. I like listen to Megyn Kelly, and now all of a sudden she's like, oh my gosh, the stuff they put in the food. I got to change my diet now. And so, I mean, if they win, it will be very interesting if RFK Jr. can make these changes and can think about the budget. The way we can reduce the budget for medical stuff, like all this stuff, if they actually can achieve some of the things that he wants to do in terms of tackling these things upstream instead of let's give you a bunch of pills.
The emergence of Maha has been the best thing about this election, and probably the best thing that I think Trump has ever done. I think because he's shown whether or not he actually manages to win and then manages to take office, it was the first time that actual kind of unity and solidarity has happened in my memory, between like disparate groups. So like the crunchy moms and
Yes.
late union labor
Yes.
and like diner waitresses. That just warms the cockles of my heart, and I've really been trying to steel myself and not fall into like, oh my goodness, it's all gonna be okay. I've tried to resist it just so I don't fall too hard in love with it, because that's what I've been longing to see all of my adult life, as long as I've been paying attention to politics, is that coming together and knitting together all of these the American people have been subjected to brutality, administrative and corporate brutality, to an extent that I'm not sure you guys even fully realize, because you're like maybe so used to it, and it's just, and you when you step away and you think, oh my God, American people are the greatest people on earth. They're the friendliest, warmest, most capable, most open-minded people on earth. And I've been all over this world, and I've lived in all these different countries, and you've been subjected to absolute psychological and economic warfare for most, if not all, of my life. And I really hope that that's going to change tomorrow. Bring out my Trump pen again.
Look like Pez dispenser. You get a little Pez come out.
That's what it looks like. Oh my gosh,
That's cute.
great. That's great.
Yeah. I have this feeling like I just want to ignore the entire election and just wake up next week and somebody just tell me what happened. Just like, I'm nervous about it. Quite nervous.
Well, you have states saying they're not going to even be done counting for at least a week or weeks or whatever. This is going to get dragged out. I don't think tomorrow there's going to be in my opinion, I don't think there's going to be a firm decision tomorrow. Or
I think you're right.
Winner tomorrow.
Later Holmes says, just repeat to yourself, it's just an election. I should really just relax. Let's do that. Yeah. It is helpful to me to think about the fact that intelligent people on both sides are feeling the same way. Both sides are feeling like this is catastrophic if their side doesn't win. And so that sort of highlights the fallacy of it for me. And helps me to chill out a bit on it, even though I have strong feelings about it.
Amen.
Yeah. Final thoughts, anybody? We're at the end of the hour.
Well, I'll be thinking about you all tomorrow and the next day. And I'll be watching closely from afar.
I'm doing a group tomorrow, so anybody who wants to step away from the television or their phones for an hour and a half and
join solid
together. Ground. Yeah. First day will be tomorrow. So hopefully people will be there, and if they need to talk about that, then that's what we'll talk about. But if you want to step away from that, we can step away from that too.
I wanted to say, did I tell you guys about the barn building idea before we got on the call, or once we got in it?
I think
okay. I'll say that because that was really kind of positive to me. I've been watching Mark Halperin's Two-Way, which brings like a Democrat and Republican strategist on to talk. The audience gets to come in and speak and ask questions. It's extremely civil. You get to learn a lot of different perspectives. And somebody came on recently who was a fisherman but got multiple sclerosis and is somehow starting this farm. And somehow I guess people that have MS may be able to come, and if they can do a little movement or work, they can work there if they can't do their jobs anymore. Mark was so into this idea that he's like, let's get this whole Two-Way community to like help you with this. And so they're like, sign up for his Instagram. And then he said, hey, does anybody know how to do a website? Does anybody know how to help him set up a nonprofit and write grants? And so over several days, people in this community have all jumped in. The guy came in and reported today, here's the website, here's this, here's that. And it's so, it's multiple, partisan people from both sides jumping in and wanting to help on this project. And I would love them to continue. I don't know if they will with other projects, but it was really heartening for me to see people who were voting for different people. They know that they are, and they're all like, this is guys in our community for wanting these conversations, and we all want to help out. And so that's even existing kind of gives me some hope.
Do you remember the name of the farm?
Yeah, it's called, is it Chapin Road Farms? I should know what the, He's in somewhere in New England. I forget. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it even went up to like, I think they only had like 30 Instagram followers the other day. And then like I checked on Friday, there was like 1,000. And then it was just like, spreading. And so I just want to see, I'd like them to pick up more projects. If someone says we're doing a who knows what, right? Like, and people saying, I want to offer my skills. I know how to do a website. I know how to do social media. I know how to do whatever. So we can come together if we choose to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. That's great. Thank you, Deborah, for sharing that. All right, you guys, have a good week. I'll see you next Monday. We'll talk about whatever. We'll see what happens.
See you on the flip side, ladies.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, everybody who joined in the chat, and good luck. And yeah, have a great week, everybody.
Yes.